The second oldest, most beautiful synagogue in England. My name is Clive Bettington. I'm doing a tour guide of boxing of the East End. Today's walk is mainly of the Jewish East End. This synagogue is very much linked to a man who's known as the father of scientific boxing, Daniel Mendoza. He's probably also the most famous Jewish boxer who's ever lived. He was born in 1765, very close to this area. And this was his closest synagogue. It's a Sephardic synagogue, which means the Jews came from Spain and Portugal. And he was born in Springfield. He was bar mitzvah in the synagogue. And he married his bride, who was only 15 at the time, a very pretty bride. He was married in this beautiful synagogue. It is unbelievably beautiful inside. And he was buried in this Sephardic cemetery in Mile End Road, which belongs to the synagogue. So he must have been very religious at the end of his life. He chose to be buried there. But he died in great poverty. And we are aiming to make a film about Daniel Mendoza, a feature film. And the synagogue authorities have agreed for us to film it here. Now in a street called Middlesex Street. After 1830, its official name was Petticoat Lane, and it was renamed Middlesex Street then. Towards there now, it's an alleyway which has disappeared completely. It was called Horseshoe Alley, and that's really where Daniel Mendoza was born in 1765. Of course, it's all gone, all these great courtyards and alleyways were cleared off in the great slum clearances of the late Victorian age, actually. Wentworth Street, and a woman who lived here in 1795. No one knows her real name. She was only known as the Boxing Jewess of Wentworth Street. And in 1795 she fought a match. In those days boxing among women was quite common, against a woman called Mary Fielding, and Daniel Mendoza acted as her second. They boxed for 2 hours. They had 70 falls altogether between them, and eventually Mary Fielding won. And she won a prize money of 20 guineas actually, but they must have been both very badly injured actually, because the description of female fighting at the time was quite horrendous. They'd be bleeding from almost every orifice. Their breasts were enlarged and aching, and to go on for 2 hours hitting one of the bare knuckle boxers must have done tremendous damage. About the early 19th century, and the Victorians banned it. They didn't allow gentlemen to box actually, and of course it's been restarted for the 2012 Olympic Games actually. It's quite interesting to see how it works out. I always get a good feeling there was an element of pornography about it, but the men would enjoy it so much actually, especially when the women stripped down. In some cases they stripped down to their waist to hit one another. Okay. I think there was a pornographic element to it. Okay. Right, certainly we now where the Shell Garage is, was the site of a pub Daniel Mendoza started, really with the idea, I suppose, to give himself an income in his declining years. He had 10 children, legitimate children. I don't know whether he had any legitimate children, but he had quite a racing sex life. And but unfortunately he took to drink. He was very profligate in his spending habits, and he died in complete poverty. And I'm not quite sure, because no biography has ever been written about Mendoza. You know, how he found the money for his burial, whether the synagogue buried him free of charge, which seems unlikely. He's just buried in the Sephardic cemetery down the road. And we're not going there today, so I'll tell you that the Sephardic cemetery was sold to Queen Mary University in the 1970s, and 7,000 bodies were dug up and thrown into a communal grave in Essex, in Brentford in Essex, and one of them was Daniel Mendoza. They didn't even bother to keep his tombstone, and they threw away his tombstone. I think one person they would have saved was Mendoza. So my society put up a plaque on the site where he had been buried, and it's now at Queen Mary University. Where we are now, the borders was the site of the most famous Yiddish theatre in the Jewish East End, the Pavilion. It became a Yiddish theatre in 1895. It was known as the Drury Lane of the East. But it closed down in 1935 and the building was demolished in the 1960s. But it was also used occasionally as a boxing venue. And among the people who boxed here was Eric Zielig, who had been the German boxing champion. And he came here, of course, before 35, and he'd been a German boxing champion, but Hitler, of course, moved all the honours of Jewish athletes. But various other Jewish boxers also boxed here. But as I said, it was demolished in 1935. We're now in Romford Street, just north of Whitechapel Road. This street was built in the late 1890s by a man called Samuel Lewis, who was Jewish philanthropist, which is solidly Jewish period in the Second World War. The most famous person born in the street was Jack Kid Berg, famous boxer whose real name was Judah Bergman. And he went on, of course, to become the big British champion. He was a very close friend of Jack Spotts, who lived in the adjacent streets. A man called Jack Comachero, his real name was Comachero Camera. He thought Jack Spott was there to spot in his face. And whenever there's trouble, he was on the spot. He was actually a racketeer. He ran protection rackets. He ran illegal gambling houses called Spiele. And he was known to have murdered several people. But he lived in Merrill Street mainly because his mother lived there. When he came out of prison, the first thing he did was return to see his mother. The Cray brothers got their opening in life by acting as bodyguards to Jack Spott. They were involved in boxing and they gravitated towards gangsters. But it's thought that Jack Berg was also very much on the fringe of the whole thing. Right. We're now looking at a street called Umberton Street. It's a very short, ugly little street here. This is the birthplace to two of the toughest men in the Jewish East End. One was called Gershon Mendeloff, who became better known as Ted Kid Lewis, who actually won a world championship. Many people regard him as the most famous boxer ever to have emerged from the East End. But he rather blighted his career somewhat by becoming a great supporter of Oswald Mosley, the leader of the British Union of Factions. But I must emphasise he became his assistant while the new party was being run by Mosley. And this wasn't blatantly anti-Semitic at that stage, actually. But he trained Oswald Mosley's bodyguard and actually stood as a candidate for the new party in the Shoreditch council elections. The other person who came from this area, born in the street, was a man called Two Gun Cohen, who was mugged an old lady at the age of 12 outside the Jewish Free School, where we went. He was sent to industrial school. At the age of 15, he immigrated to Canada, where he befriended the Chinese community, and they invited him to go out to China, where he took part in the revolution against the emperor, and became military advisor to Sun Yat-sen, the first president of China. And he used to walk around Shanghai and Peking with a holster of 2 pistols in his and I think he also regarded himself as a great boxer, actually. And he was in a Japanese prisoner of war camp, and he died in 1955 in Manchester as a result of the injuries he sustained in the prisoner of war camp. Right, certainly. We're now standing outside Bernard Barron House. It's actually better known as the Oxford St George's Club, and was founded in the 1920s by a very wealthy Anglo-Jew, Sir Basil Enricus. Basil Enricus came from the Montefiore family, one of the richest families in England, and he and his wife decided the best way to help the poor Jews in the East End was actually to live among them. So he founded the Oxford St George's Club, first of all in Cannon Street Road, and it moved later to this building which is now called Bernard Barron House. It was financed by Bernard Barron, the chairman of Carrera Cigarette Company, a very rich man who gave £60,000 for the building of this. But people always continue to notice at Oxford St George's, and he and his wife lived in this building, and they had all kinds of things for the Jewish young. Actually, they took them on seaside holidays. They taught them about Shakespeare and music. They had a jazz club. This is Ronnie Scott, the great jazz player, started his jazz career. But above all, they were known for their boxing club. A lot of these boys' boxing clubs were started by the Anglo-Jews, with the principal aim really was to make sure they developed proper physiques and became little Englishmen rather than to have weak physiques, as they did, a lot of them did, coming from Eastern Europe, where they had diseases like rickets and that sort of thing, actually. And it became such a successful boxing club, Oxford St George's, that they won the trophy every year for the boys' boxing clubs among the Jewish boxing clubs. The other clubs were the Cambridge, the Brady Street Club, and the Arby Youth Club, actually. All these clubs are now ceased to exist, and the only really boys' club left in the East End is the Repton, which of course is one of the most reputable in the country. It produces all the great new boxers from the East End. This rather strange building behind me is another of the great boxing venues on this very site. It's very run down, dirty, and I can't find any photographs of it, so I get an idea of what it must look like from this description. It was owned by a man called Brown, who weighed 25 stone, but it's played host to some of the great boxing competitions. Jackie Berg boxed here quite regularly, as did Kid Lewis. Another famous non-Jewish boxer, of course, Nipper Daly boxed here. Started boxing at the age of 10. He was boxing professionally at the age of 14 and retired at 17, actually, by which time his bones were damaged. But it was also used very much by Ellsworth Mosley for his rallies.